The gunshot that killed Amelia Brighton's father echoed through the Wyoming Valley on a Tuesday morning in April of 1878, and by Thursday she stood in the dusty parlor of the Hollow Creek Ranch, agreeing to marry a man whose eyes held all the warmth of a winter storm. Vincent Easton didn't look at her when he nodded his acceptance of the arrangement. He kept his gaze fixed on the lawyer from Ogden who'd drawn up the papers, his jaw set in a hard line that suggested he found the entire situation as distasteful as she did. Amelia studied him from beneath her lashes, taking in the broad shoulders that filled out his work shirt, the calloused hands that held the pen with surprising delicacy, and the dark hair that fell across his forehead despite his attempt to slick it back. He was handsome in a rough way, she supposed, though his expression remained as unreadable as stone. "Miss Brighton," the lawyer said, adjusting his spectacles, "do you understand the terms? This marriage is strictly a business arrangement. Your father's debts to the bank total $3,000. Mr. Easton has agreed to settle these debts in exchange for your hand in marriage and the water rights to your father's northern property." "I understand." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. What choice did she have? The bank would take everything anyway, and she'd be left with nothing but the clothes on her back. At least this way, she'd have a roof over her head, even if the man providing it clearly wanted nothing to do with her beyond the legal contract. Vincent finally looked at her then, his gray eyes sweeping over her face with an expression she couldn't quite read. "The marriage will be in name only," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You'll have your own room. I expect you to help with the household management and perhaps some of the bookkeeping. Beyond that, we need not trouble each other." The words stung more than they should have. Amelia lifted her chin, meeting his gaze directly. "That suits me perfectly, Mr. Easton. I have no more desire for a romantic entanglement than you do." Something flickered in his eyes, but it vanished before she could identify it. He turned back to the papers and signed his name with a flourish. The lawyer passed the documents to her, and she signed as well, sealing her fate with strokes of black ink. They were married 2 days later in the small church in Ogden, with only the lawyer and Vincent's foreman, a weathered man named Tom Richards, as witnesses. Amelia wore her mother's blue dress, the only nice thing she owned, and carried no flowers. Vincent wore his Sunday best, which looked barely more formal than his everyday clothes, and spoke his vows in a monotone that suggested he'd rather be anywhere else. The ride back to Hollow Creek Ranch took 3 hours, and they spent it in complete silence. Amelia sat rigidly in the wagon seat, acutely aware of Vincent's presence beside her, the heat radiating from his body despite the cool spring air. The landscape rolled past them in waves of green and brown, dotted with cattle and the occasional homestead. She tried to memorize the route, noting landmarks and distances, already planning the mental map she'd need to navigate her new life. The ranch house itself was larger than she'd expected, a 2-story structure of weathered wood with a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. The barn and outbuildings looked well maintained, and she could see several ranch hands working in the distance. Whatever else Vincent Easton might be, he clearly ran a successful operation. "Your room is upstairs, second door on the right," Vincent said as they entered the house. He didn't offer to carry her bag. "Dinner is at 6. I take breakfast at dawn." "I'll be ready," she replied, gripping her small carpetbag tighter. He nodded once and walked away, his boots heavy on the wooden floor. Amelia stood in the entrance hall, suddenly overwhelmed by the reality of her situation. This was her home now. This cold, silent house with its cold, silent master. She climbed the stairs slowly, finding the room he'd indicated. It was sparse but clean, with a narrow bed, a dresser, a washstand, and a single window overlooking the eastern pastures. She set down her bag and sank onto the bed, finally allowing herself to feel the weight of the past week. Her father, dead from a bullet meant for someone else in a saloon dispute. The discovery of his gambling debts. The banker's cold smile as he'd suggested she might solve her problems through a advantageous marriage. And now this, a loveless union with a stranger who looked at her as if she were just another burden to bear. Amelia pressed her palms against her eyes, refusing to cry. She'd done enough crying. Now she needed to be strong to make the best of an impossible situation. She'd survived worse than an indifferent husband. At least here she'd be fed and sheltered. Many women had less. The days that followed established a pattern. She woke before dawn, dressed quickly, and went down to the kitchen to help Martha, the ranch cook, prepare breakfast. Martha was a stout woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She'd worked for Vincent for 10 years and clearly ran the household with an iron fist. "Don't mind Mr. Easton's moods," Martha said that first morning as they worked side by side, frying eggs and bacon for the ranch hands. "He's had a hard time of it, lost his whole family 5 years back. His parents and his younger sister, all 3 of them to the fever. Changed him, it did." He used to smile more. The information surprised Amelia. She'd assumed Vincent was simply cold by nature, but grief was something she understood intimately. Still, 5 years seemed a long time to hold onto such rigid remoteness. "That's very sad," she said carefully, cracking another egg into the pan. Martha glanced at her with sympathy. "I heard about your father. I'm sorry for your loss, dear. These are hard times for everyone." After breakfast, Vincent would disappear to work the ranch, and Amelia would turn to the household tasks. She discovered quickly that the house had been neglected beyond Martha's ability to manage alone. The windows needed washing, the curtains needed mending, and the office where Vincent kept his books was a disaster of papers and receipts. She started with the office, spending hours organizing documents and creating a system that actually made sense. When Vincent came in late one evening and found her still working by lamplight, he stopped in the doorway. "What are you doing?" She looked up, pushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "I found 3 unpaid invoices that were overdue by 2 months. I've prepared letters to send with payment. And I've organized all the receipts by month and category. You were paying the feed supplier twice the going rate, so I've drafted a letter to renegotiate the contract." He stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he stepped closer, examining the neat stacks of papers on the desk. "You can read and write, of course," she said, slightly offended. "My mother was a school teacher before she married. She made sure I had a proper education. And you understand contracts and business." "My father wasn't always a gambler, Mr. Easton. He used to run a dry goods store. I kept his books from the time I was 12. She didn't add that his descent into gambling and drink had started after her mother died, or that she'd watched helplessly as he destroyed everything they'd built. Vincent picked up one of the letters she'd written, scanning it with those sharp gray eyes. "This is good work," he said finally. It was the first compliment he'd given her, and it warmed something in her chest despite her determination to remain unmoved. "Thank you." "Continue," he said, setting down the letter. "If you can bring order to this mess, I'd be grateful." It wasn't much, but it felt like progress. Amelia returned to her work with renewed energy, and she could feel his eyes on her for another moment before he left the room. The weeks passed, and spring deepened into early summer. Amelia established herself as an indispensable part of the ranch's operation, managing the books with an efficiency that saved Vincent both time and money. She learned the names of all the ranch hands, treated them with respect, and earned their loyalty in return. She helped Martha with the cooking and cleaning, tended a garden she started behind the house, and gradually transformed the ranch house from a bachelor's neglected dwelling into a proper home. Through it all, Vincent remained distantly polite. He thanked her for her work, nodded his approval at the improvements she made, but never let his guard down. They ate their meals in near silence, sitting at opposite ends of the dining table like strangers forced to share a space. At night, she'd hear him pacing in his room down the hall, restless sounds that spoke of sleeplessness and troubles he never shared. Amelia told herself she didn't care. She'd accepted the terms of their arrangement. Love had never been part of the bargain. But something in her rebelled against the coldness between them, against the waste of two lives lived in parallel without ever truly touching. She'd catch herself watching him sometimes, noticing the way sunlight caught in his dark hair, or the rare moments when his expression softened while he worked with the horses. There was a good man buried under all that ice, she thought. A man worth knowing, if he'd ever allow anyone close enough to try. The change began on a June evening when a violent thunderstorm rolled across the valley. Amelia was in the kitchen helping Martha prepare supper when they heard shouting from outside. Through the window, she could see ranch hands running toward the barn, and in the distance, she spotted cattle breaking through a fence line spooked by the thunder. "Lord have mercy," Martha breathed. "The herd stampeding." Without thinking, Amelia ran for the door. Behind her, Martha called out in alarm, but she ignored it. She'd grown up around cattle. She knew what a stampede could mean, the damage it could cause, the lives it could cost. She reached the barn as Vincent was saddling his horse, his movements quick and efficient despite the chaos around them. His eyes widened when he saw her. "Get back in the house," he ordered. "I can help," she shot back. "I can ride." "Amelia, this is dangerous. Go inside." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and under other circumstances she might have appreciated it. Instead, she grabbed a saddle and headed for one of the horses in the stalls. "You need every available hand. I'm coming." For a moment she thought he'd argue, but then another crack of thunder split the air and he cursed. "Stay behind me. Do exactly as I say." They rode out into the storm, the rain coming down in sheets that made it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. The cattle were scattered across the eastern pasture, still running in blind panic. Vincent shouted instructions to his men, directing them to flank the herd and try to turn it back. Amelia followed his lead, her heart pounding with fear and exhilaration in equal measure. She saw the calf break away from the main group, heading straight for the ravine that cut through the northern edge of the property. Without the herd to follow, it would run right over the edge and plummet to its death on the rocks below. She didn't stop to think, just urged her horse forward, racing to cut off the panicked animal. The ground was slick with mud, treacherous under her horse's hooves. She heard Vincent shouting behind her, but she couldn't make out the words over the storm. She pulled alongside the calf, leaning low to turn it back toward safety. For a moment she thought she'd succeeded, but then her horse hit a patch of loose earth and stumbled. The world tilted sickeningly. She felt herself falling, had just enough time to kick free of the stirrups before she hit the ground hard enough to knock the breath from her lungs. Above her, the sky wheeled in dizzy circles. She tried to push herself up, her hands sinking into mud, and realized with dawning horror that she was only feet from the ravine's edge. Then Vincent was there, dismounting in one fluid motion and grabbing her arms, hauling her back from the drop. They collapsed together in the mud, his body covering hers protectively as the frightened cattle thundered past on either side. She could feel his heart racing against her back, could hear his ragged breathing in her ear. Are you insane?" he demanded, his voice raw with something that sounded like fear. "You could have died, the calf," she gasped out. "I had to save the calf." "Damn the calf!" He rolled her over to face him, his hands framing her face, his eyes wild as they searched her features. "Are you hurt? Tell me where you're hurt." "I'm fine," she managed, though her ribs ached and she'd probably have bruises for weeks. "Vincent, I'm fine." He stared at her for a long moment, rain streaming down his face, his expression stripped of all its usual carefully controlled mask. What she saw there took her breath away more thoroughly than the fall had. Terror, relief, and something deeper, something that made her pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with danger. Then his mouth was on hers, hard and desperate, tasting of rain and need. She gasped against his lips, and he deepened the kiss, one hand tangling in her wet hair while the other pressed against the small of her back, pulling her closer. It was nothing like the chaste kiss they'd exchanged at their wedding. This was fire and lightning, months of tension and unspoken longing crashing together like the storm raging around them. When he finally pulled back, they were both shaking. Vincent's eyes were wide with shock at his own actions. "Amelia, don't you dare apologize," she said fiercely, her hands fisted in his soaking shirt. "Don't you dare say that was a mistake." "We had an agreement," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "A marriage in name only. I promised you to hell with what you promised." She pulled him back down, kissing him with all the passion she'd been suppressing for months. He groaned against her mouth and surrendered, and for long minutes there was nothing but the two of them and the rain and the release of pretending they didn't want each other. Tom's shout finally broke them apart. Vincent helped her to her feet, his hands lingering on her waist, neither of them willing to quite let go. The ranch hands had managed to contain the cattle, though several fence sections would need repair. The crisis was over. They rode back to the house in silence, but it was a different quality of silence than before, charged with awareness and possibility. At the door, Vincent caught her hand. "We need to talk," he said quietly. "Yes," she agreed. "We do." But Martha descended on them the moment they entered, fussing over their muddy, bedraggled state and insisting they both needed hot baths and dry clothes immediately. By the time Amelia had washed and changed, exhaustion had caught up with her. Her body ached from the fall, and the adrenaline that had sustained her through the evening had faded, leaving her wrung out and shaky. She found Vincent waiting outside her door, his hair still damp from his own bath, dressed in clean work clothes. The carefully controlled mask was back in place, but she could see the cracks in it now, the uncertainty in his eyes. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Sore," she admitted. "But nothing serious." He nodded, then seemed to struggle with what to say next. Finally, he gestured down the hall. "Would you come to my room? I think we should have that conversation in private." Her heart stuttered, but she nodded and followed him. His room was larger than hers, dominated by a large bed and furnished with heavy, masculine pieces. He lit a lamp and turned to face her, keeping a careful distance between them. "I owe you an apology," he began. "Vincent, please let me say this." He took a deep breath. "I had no right to kiss you like that. We have an agreement and I violated it. You came into this marriage with the understanding that I would never expect or demand certain things from you. My behavior tonight was inexcusable." Amelia felt something inside her crack open. "Is that truly what you think? That you took advantage of me, didn't I?" His voice was rough with self-recrimination. "You were vulnerable, scared. I let my emotions get the better of me." "And what if my emotions were equally involved?" she asked softly, taking a step toward him. "What if I wanted you to kiss me? What if I've been wanting it for weeks now?" His eyes snapped to hers, searching. Amelia, don't say things you don't mean out of some misguided sense of obligation. I'm saying them because they're true. She closed the distance between them, placing her hands on his chest. She could feel his heart hammering beneath her palms. I know what we agreed to. I know this was supposed to be a business arrangement. But somewhere along the way, things changed for me. Maybe it was watching you work with the horses, the gentle way you treat them. Maybe it was realizing how much you've suffered and how bravely you carry it. Or maybe it was simply spending every day in the same house as you, seeing all the small kindnesses you show to everyone but yourself. You don't understand what you're saying, he said, but his hands had come up to rest on her waist, betraying his words. I'm not a good man, Amelia. I'm broken. I let my family down, let them die while I was off in Cheyenne on business. I came home to bury them, and I swore I'd never let anyone close enough to lose them again. That's why I agreed to a loveless marriage, why I thought I could keep you at arm's length. Your family's death wasn't your fault, she said firmly. Fever doesn't respect business trips or good intentions, and you're not broken, Vincent. You're grieving. There's a difference. You sound so certain. His voice was barely above a whisper. I am certain. Because I was broken too, watching my father destroy himself and being powerless to stop it. I thought I'd never trust anyone again, never let myself care. But you've shown me something different. You've shown me that strength doesn't mean shutting everyone out. It means having the courage to let people in despite the risk. Amelia. He breathed her name like a prayer, his forehead coming to rest against hers. I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I remember how to be close to someone, how to be a real husband. Then we'll figure it out together, she said. We don't have to rush anything. We can take this as slowly as you need. But please, Vincent, don't shut me out anymore. Don't pretend we're just business partners when we both know we've become so much more than that. He was quiet for a long moment, and she could feel the war happening inside him, the struggle between fear and desire. Then, slowly, his arms came around her, pulling her into an embrace that felt like coming home. I'm terrified, he admitted against her hair. I know, she whispered. So am I. They stood like that for a long time, just holding each other. When they finally separated, Vincent's eyes were bright with unshed tears, but there was also something new there, something that looked like hope. Would you stay? He asked hesitantly. Not for anything improper, just... I don't want to be alone tonight. We could talk, get to know each other properly. The way we should have from the beginning. I'd like that, she said. They sat on his bed, backs against the headboard, close but not quite touching. And slowly, haltingly at first but with growing ease, they began to talk. Vincent told her about his childhood, about his sister Sarah who'd been funny and bright and full of dreams, about his parents who'd built the ranch from nothing and taught him everything he knew. He spoke of the guilt that haunted him, the way he'd played that final day over and over in his mind, wondering if there was something he could have done differently. Amelia shared her own stories in return. She told him about her mother, the school teacher who'd fallen in love with a charming shopkeeper and never regretted it, even when times got hard. She described watching her father spiral after the fever took her mother, the slow dissolution of the man she'd loved into someone she barely recognized. She admitted how alone she'd felt, how scared, and how angry she'd been at fate for taking everything from her. I thought marriage to you would be a prison, she confessed. Another loss of freedom, another situation where I had no control over my own life. And now? He asked, his hand finding hers in the space between them. Now I think it might be the first real home I've had in years. She squeezed his fingers. If you'll let it be, I want that, he said. More than I thought possible. You've brought light back into this house, Amelia, into my life. I've been watching you these past months, seeing how kind you are to Martha and the Hands, how hard you work, how you sing sometimes while you tend your garden. I told myself it didn't matter, that I wouldn't let it matter. But tonight, when I saw you fall, when I thought I might lose you—" His voice cracked. "I realized I've been lying to myself. I care about you, more than care. I think I might be falling in love with you," her breath caught. "Might be, Em," he corrected, turning to face her fully. "I am falling in love with you. Maybe I have been since the day you stood in my parlor with your chin raised and your eyes full of pride, refusing to be ashamed of circumstances beyond your control. You're the bravest person I know." "I don't feel brave," she said. "I feel like I'm about to jump off a cliff." "Then let's jump together." He cupped her face in his hands, his touch infinitely gentle. "I can't promise I'll be easy to love. I'm going to have dark days. I'm going to struggle with letting you in completely. But I swear I'll try. If you'll be patient with me, I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you." "You already are," she said, tears streaming down her face now. "You already are." This kiss was different from the one in the storm. Slower, deeper, full of promise instead of desperation. When they finally parted, both of them were smiling. They talked through the night, dozing occasionally against each other's shoulders but always waking to continue the conversation, as if making up for months of silence all at once. They discussed everything and nothing, their favorite foods and colors, their hopes and fears, their dreams for the future. By the time dawn light crept through the window, something fundamental had shifted between them. They were no longer strangers bound by legal contract. They were partners, choosing each other freely. The ranch hands noticed the change immediately. Vincent smiled more, laughed at Tom's jokes, and was often seen standing close to Amelia as they discussed the day's work. Amelia bloomed under his attention, her eyes bright with happiness, her whole bearing transformed from wary survival to genuine joy. Martha was delighted. "About time," she muttered, watching them share a lingering glance over breakfast one morning. "I was beginning to think you'd both forgotten what a real marriage looked like." Vincent surprised Amelia a week later by taking her to Ogden for the day. They walked through the town together, and he bought her fabric for new dresses, refusing to hear her protests about the expense. "You're my wife," he said firmly, in a tone that brooked no argument. "My real wife in every sense that matters. Let me provide for you properly." They ate dinner at the hotel restaurant, a luxury Amelia hadn't experienced in years. Over roast beef and potatoes, Vincent reached across the table and took her hand. "I've been thinking," he said, "about our wedding, or lack thereof." "We had a wedding," she pointed out. "We had a legal proceeding that happened to take place in a church." He rubbed his thumb across her knuckles. "I want to do it properly. Have a real celebration, invite the neighbors, let everyone know that you're truly my wife and I'm proud of it. Would you be willing to renew our vows?" Amelia felt her eyes fill with tears. "Yes, I'd love that." They planned the ceremony for a month later, giving them time to prepare. Amelia sewed herself a proper wedding dress from the cream-colored silk Vincent had bought her, working on it in the evenings while he read aloud from the newspaper. The domesticity of it all still sometimes took her breath away, the simple fact that she had a home, a partner, someone who cared about her happiness. The physical side of their relationship developed slowly, carefully. Vincent was conscious of her earlier nervousness and determined to make sure she felt safe and cherished. They progressed in stages, from chaste kisses to longer embraces, from holding hands to falling asleep in each other's arms. Each new level of intimacy felt like unwrapping a precious gift. It was 2 weeks before the ceremony when Vincent finally asked if she'd consider moving into his room permanently. "Only if you're ready," he added quickly. "I don't want to rush you into anything." Amelia thought about her narrow bed in the guest room, about the nights she lay awake wishing she was down the hall in Vincent's arms. "I'm ready," she said. "I think I've been ready for a while now." That night, she moved her belongings into his room, and for the first time since their marriage began, they lay together as husband and wife in truth. Vincent was gentle and patient, taking his time to learn what pleased her, whispering words of love and devotion that made her feel precious beyond measure. Afterward, wrapped in his arms with her head on his chest, Amelia felt a sense of peace and rightness she'd never experienced before. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," he replied, his arms tightening around her. "More than I knew I could love anyone." The second wedding took place on a Sunday afternoon in July, with half the county in attendance. Amelia wore her silk dress and carried wildflowers from her garden. Vincent wore a new suit he'd had tailored in Cheyenne, and when he saw her walking toward him on Tom's arm, his eyes went bright with tears. They spoke their vows with full hearts this time, meaning every word. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Vincent kissed her in front of God and everyone, a kiss that left no doubt about his feelings. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. The celebration lasted well into the evening, with music and dancing and more food than anyone could eat. Amelia danced with Vincent under the stars, his arms strong around her waist, his eyes full of love. "Happy," he murmured into her ear. "Happier than I ever thought possible," she replied honestly. "Good, because I plan to spend the rest of my life keeping you that way." The months that followed were the happiest of Amelia's life. She and Vincent worked side by side during the days, managing the ranch together in true partnership. At night, they retreated to their room, making love and talking and building the foundation of a life together. They had disagreements sometimes, about ranch business or household matters, but they'd learned to communicate openly, to listen to each other's perspectives. The fights never lasted long, usually ending with laughter and apologies. In October, Amelia realized she'd missed her monthly courses. She waited another month to be sure before telling Vincent, wanting to be certain before raising his hopes. When she finally shared the news on a cold November evening, he went completely still. "A baby," he breathed. "We're going to have a baby." "Yes," she said, watching his face anxiously. They'd never discussed children, and she suddenly worried he might not want them, might see it as too much risk, too much potential for loss. But then he whooped with joy and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to put her down before she got dizzy. He set her down carefully, immediately contrite. "I'm sorry, I should be more gentle. Are you well? Do you need anything? Should you be resting?" "Vincent, I'm pregnant, not made of glass," she said, amused. "Women have been doing this since the beginning of time." But he fussed over her anyway, insisting she not overwork herself, making sure she ate enough, worrying over every small discomfort. It was endearing, if occasionally exasperating. Martha rolled her eyes at his hovering but clearly approved of his devotion. The winter passed slowly, with Amelia's belly growing as the snow piled up outside. They spent the long evenings planning for the baby, converting the room next to theirs into a nursery, discussing names and hopes and dreams for their child. Vincent would often rest his hand on her stomach, marveling when he felt the baby move. "I'm terrified," he admitted one night. "What if something goes wrong? What if I lose you both?" "You won't," she said firmly, covering his hand with hers. "We're both strong and we have each other. We're going to be fine. Promise me that if it comes to a choice, you tell the doctor to save you," he said urgently. "Promise me, Amelia." "It won't come to that," she insisted, but she saw the genuine fear in his eyes and softened. "But if it makes you feel better, I promise. Though I have every intention of us all surviving this just fine." The baby came in early May on a morning that dawned bright and clear. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Vincent, pacing outside the bedroom door, looked ready to break it down and intervene. But Amelia was as strong as she'd promised, and when the doctor finally emerged with a squalling bundle, Vincent nearly collapsed with relief. "You have a son," the doctor announced, beaming, "and your wife is doing well. Tired, but well." Vincent rushed into the room, his eyes immediately seeking Amelia. She lay propped against the pillows, exhausted and pale but smiling. In her arms was a tiny, red-faced infant with a shock of dark hair. "Meet James," she said softly. "James Vincent Easton." Vincent sank onto the bed beside them, his hands shaking as he reached out to touch his son's impossibly small fingers. "He's perfect," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You're both perfect." "We did it," Amelia said, leaning against his shoulder. "You did it," he corrected. "You're amazing. I love you so much." "I love you too." She turned her face up for a kiss, gentle and full of promise. James was an easy baby, content and healthy from the start. Vincent proved to be a devoted father, getting up for nighttime feedings without complaint, spending his evenings holding his son and singing lullabies in a surprisingly good voice. Watching him with the baby, seeing the gentleness and love he showed, Amelia fell in love with him all over again. Life settled into a new rhythm, busier but richer than before. The ranch continued to prosper under their joint management, and they began to expand, buying the neighboring property when it came up for sale. They hired more hands, built new outbuildings, and established themselves as one of the most successful operations in the valley. On James's first birthday, they threw a party that rivaled their wedding celebration. Friends and neighbors came from miles around, bearing gifts and good wishes. Amelia stood on the porch, watching Vincent play with their son in the yard, and felt a profound sense of gratitude for the turns her life had taken. Martha came to stand beside her. "Never seen Mr. Easton so happy," the older woman said with satisfaction. "You've been good for him, dear." "Good for all of us." "He's been good for me too," Amelia replied. "I never knew I could be this happy." That night, after the guests had left and James was asleep in his crib, Vincent pulled Amelia into his arms in their bedroom. "2 years," he said wonderingly. 2 years since we stood in my parlor and agreed to a loveless marriage." "Seems like another lifetime," she agreed. "I was such a fool," he said, shaking his head. "I thought I could protect myself from pain by never letting anyone close. I had no idea what I was missing." "We both had things to learn," Amelia said diplomatically. "Yes, but you learned them faster." He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, finally her lips. "You had the courage to risk your heart, to push past my defenses and make me feel again. I'll be grateful for that every day of my life." "You gave me a home," she replied. "A real home, full of love and laughter and everything I thought I'd lost forever. That's worth being grateful for too." They made love that night with the tenderness of long familiarity and the passion of deep devotion. Afterwards, lying in the darkness with Vincent's arms around her, and the sounds of their sleeping son drifting from the next room, Amelia reflected on the strange paths life could take. A forced marriage to settle debts had become the greatest blessing she'd ever received. A cold, distant stranger had become the man she loved more than life itself. "What are you thinking?" Vincent murmured sleepily. "That I'm glad I fell off that horse," she said with a smile. He huffed a quiet laugh. "I aged 10 years that night, but yes, I suppose I'm glad too. It certainly accelerated things. We would have figured it out eventually," she said confidently. "We're both too stubborn to have stayed distant forever." "Maybe," he conceded, "but I'm grateful we didn't waste any more time than we did." 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter, whom they named Sarah after Vincent's sister. She had Amelia's auburn hair and Vincent's gray eyes, and she wrapped her father around her tiny finger from the moment she entered the world. James, now 3, was intensely curious about his baby sister, constantly wanting to help with her care. The ranch continued to grow and thrive. They built a new barn, expanded the house to accommodate their growing family, and became pillars of the community. Vincent served on the town council, and Amelia started a lending library in Ogden, using books she ordered from the East to bring learning and entertainment to the valley's residents. They faced challenges, of course. A harsh winter in 1883 killed part of the herd and strained their finances. James broke his arm falling from a tree, giving them both a terrible scare. Sarah developed a bad cough one winter that had them hovering anxiously until it finally cleared. But they faced everything together, their bond only growing stronger with each trial they overcame. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Vincent arranged for Martha to watch the children and took Amelia on a trip to Cheyenne. It was the first time they'd been alone together in years, and they savored the freedom of exploring the city without worrying about little ones. Over dinner at the finest restaurant in the city, Vincent presented her with a velvet box. Inside was a delicate gold necklace with a pendant shaped like a heart. "I never gave you a proper wedding ring the first time," he said, "or any jewelry at all. I want you to have this to know how precious you are to me." Amelia's eyes filled with tears as he fastened it around her neck. "It's beautiful. But Vincent, you didn't need to, I wanted to," he interrupted. "I want to give you everything, Amelia. Not because I owe you or because it's expected, but because seeing you happy makes me happy. You've given me so much: love, family, purpose. This is just a small token of what you mean to me." "You've given me all those things too," she said, reaching across the table to take his hand. "More than I ever dreamed possible. That day I stood in your parlor, I thought my life was over. I had no idea it was just beginning." "Neither did I," he admitted. "I thought I was just solving a problem, fulfilling an obligation. I had no idea I was meeting my soulmate." They spent the night in a hotel, making love like newlyweds and talking until dawn about their memories, their children, their plans for the future. It felt like a recommitment, a renewal of vows that needed no church or witnesses. The years continued to pass in a blur of seasons and milestones. James grew tall and strong, showing an aptitude for ranching that made Vincent burst with pride. Sarah proved to be a firebrand, intelligent and determined, with a stubborn streak that reminded everyone of her mother. In 1886, they had a third child, another son they named Robert, who had Amelia's easy temperament and sunny disposition. The house was always full of noise and laughter, of children's games and family dinners. They hosted barbecues in the summer and Christmas parties in the winter, their home becoming a gathering place for the community. Amelia's vegetable garden expanded into a full farm garden, and she began selling preserves and vegetables in town, the proceeds going to fund the library. Vincent's success with the ranch allowed him to give back to the community in other ways. He helped younger ranchers get started, offering advice and sometimes loans to those who needed them. He donated land for a new school building and served on the board, remembering how his sister had valued education. Together, he and Amelia became known as generous, fair-minded people who cared about their neighbors and their community. As their children grew older, Vincent and Amelia made time for each other, understanding that their marriage was the foundation on which everything else was built. They took evening walks when weather permitted, talking about their day and their dreams. They still worked together on the ranch books, enjoying the quiet companionship that had been one of the first things to draw them together. And at night, in the privacy of their room, they continued to find joy and comfort in each other's arms. James was 14 when he first asked about his parents' marriage. They were working together in the barn, repairing tack, when he said casually, "Tom told me you and Ma didn't get married for love, that it was arranged because of debts." Vincent's hand stilled on the leather he'd been oiling. He glanced at his son, seeing the curious intelligence in his eyes. James was old enough for the truth, he decided. "That's true," he said. "At least, that's how it started. Your mother's father had passed away, leaving debts. I needed a wife to help run the household. It seemed like a practical arrangement. But you love her now," James said. "It wasn't a question." "More than life itself," Vincent confirmed. "But it took me longer than it should have to realize it. Your mother was braver than I was. She had the courage to take a risk, to try for something more than what we'd agreed to." "What changed your mind?" James asked. Vincent thought back to that stormy night 13 years ago, the terror he'd felt watching Amelia fall, the moment he'd realized he couldn't live without her. "She fell off a horse during a storm," he said simply. "And I realized that the thought of losing her was unbearable, that somewhere along the way she'd become the most important person in my world." James was quiet for a moment, processing this. "I want to marry for love," he said finally. "When I'm older, I mean." "Good," Vincent said firmly. "You should. Everyone should if they can. Your mother and I were lucky that our practical arrangement turned into love, but it could have gone differently. Don't settle for less than what you deserve, son." "I won't," James promised. Then, with the mercurial mood of youth, he grinned. "Though I'm not thinking about marriage for a long time yet. Girls are still mostly annoying." Vincent laughed and ruffled his son's hair. "Give it a few years. That'll change." That evening, he told Amelia about the conversation. They were sitting on the porch, watching the sun set over the valley, Robert playing in the yard while Sarah practiced her reading inside. "He's growing up so fast," Amelia said with a mixture of pride and melancholy. "Soon he'll be a man." "He'll be a good one," Vincent said confidently. "We've raised him right, all of them." "We have, haven't we?" She leaned against his shoulder, fitting perfectly into the curve of his arm. "I still can't quite believe this is my life sometimes, that you're my husband, that those are our children. It feels like too much happiness for one person to contain." "You deserve every bit of it," he said, kissing the top of her head. "And more besides. You transformed my entire existence, Amelia. Before you, I was just going through the motions, working and sleeping and working again. You taught me how to live." "We taught each other," she corrected. "I was so lost when I came here. Grieving, scared, alone. You gave me stability and safety even when you thought you were keeping me at arm's length. And then you gave me your heart, which was the greatest gift of all." They sat in comfortable silence as the light faded and stars began to appear. Inside, they could hear Martha calling the children for supper. In a moment they'd go in, join their family around the dinner table, participate in the cheerful chaos of family life. But for now, they simply sat together, two people who'd started as strangers and become everything to each other. "You ever wonder what would have happened if you'd refused?" Vincent asked suddenly. "If you'd decided to take your chances rather than marry me?" Amelia considered the question seriously. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but I can't imagine that life leading anywhere good. I had nothing and no one. The bank would have taken the land. I'd probably have ended up working as a servant somewhere or worse. The marriage, even as cold as I thought it would be, was still my best option." "But if you'd known how things would turn out," he pressed. "If you'd known we'd fall in love, that we'd have this life together, would you have been less afraid?" "Probably," she said. "But maybe the fear made me appreciate it more, made me work harder to make it succeed. If I'd known it would all work out, maybe I wouldn't have tried so hard to reach you." "You were relentless," he said with affection, refusing to accept my coldness, pushing past every wall I put up. "I didn't stand a chance." "Good," she said smugly. "You needed someone relentless, someone too stubborn to give up on you." "I did," he agreed. "I absolutely did." The years continued their inexorable march forward. The children grew into young adults with lives and dreams of their own. James took over more and more of the ranch operations, showing sound judgment and a good head for business. Sarah, true to her fiery nature, announced at 16 that she wanted to be a doctor, and after some initial surprise, Vincent and Amelia supported her ambition wholeheartedly. Robert, ever the peacemaker, talked about becoming a lawyer, wanting to help people resolve conflicts. In 1893, Vincent took a bad fall from a horse and broke several ribs. For 2 weeks he was confined to bed, frustrated and in pain, while Amelia fussed over him and James handled the ranch work. It was a reminder of their mortality, of the fact that they wouldn't live forever. "I've been thinking," Vincent said one night as Amelia helped him settle for sleep, "about what happens when we're gone." "Don't talk like that," she said sharply. "You're going to be fine." "The doctor said the ribs are healing well." "I am fine," he assured her. "But we're not young anymore, love. We need to think about the future, make sure everything is in order for the children." She sighed, acknowledging the truth of his words. They were both in their 40s now, still healthy and active but no longer young. "What do you want to do?" "Split the ranch between James and Robert," he said. "James can have the main property and the cattle operation. Robert can have the northern section where your father's land was. It's good grazing land. He can build a house there, start his own herd if he wants, or sell it if he'd rather pursue law. Either way, they'll both have something." "And Sarah?" Amelia asked. "A trust fund," Vincent said. "Enough to pay for medical school and set her up wherever she decides to practice. She'll inherit the house in town we bought last year, the one we've been renting out. Between that and the trust, she'll be independent." Amelia nodded approval. "That's fair. More than fair." "They're lucky to have you as a father." "They're lucky to have you as a mother," he countered. "You're the one who taught them to be good people, to care about others, to stand up for what's right. I just taught them about cattle and contracts." "You taught them much more than that," she said firmly. "You taught them about integrity and hard work and taking care of the people who depend on you, about being strong enough to be gentle and brave enough to love. Those are valuable lessons." He pulled her down for a kiss, careful of his injured ribs. "I love you," he said simply. "Have I told you that today?" "Only 3 or 4 times," she teased, "but I never get tired of hearing it." "Good, because I plan to keep saying it for the next 40 years. Promise?" she asked. "Promise," he confirmed. Vincent recovered fully from his injuries, and life continued its rhythm. In 1895, James announced his engagement to Catherine Miller, the daughter of a neighboring rancher. The wedding was a joyous affair, with half the county in attendance. Vincent gave his son away with visible emotion, and Amelia cried happy tears throughout the ceremony. "That was us once," Vincent murmured to her during the reception. "Young and in love and full of hope." "We're still in love," she pointed out, "and we still have hope. We're just not quite as young." "Speak for yourself," he said with mock offense. "I'm in my prime." She laughed and pulled him onto the dance floor, and they whirled together under the stars, still as attuned to each other as they'd been the night of their own second wedding. 2 years later, Sarah left for medical school in the East, becoming one of the first women admitted to the program. It was bittersweet watching her go, proud of her courage but sad to see her leave. Robert followed the next year, heading to law school in Denver. Suddenly, the house that had always been full of children was quiet again, just Vincent and Amelia and Martha. Strange, isn't it? Amelia said one evening as they ate dinner in the suddenly too large dining room. All those years of chaos and noise, and now this. We did a good job, Vincent said. They're all going to be fine, better than fine. I know, she said. I just miss them. He reached across the table to take her hand. We'll have grandchildren before you know it. Catherine is already expecting. Soon enough, we'll have a whole new generation running through this house. He was right. James and Catherine's first child, a daughter named Emma, arrived in the spring of 1898, and she became the delight of her grandparents' lives. Vincent, who'd been a devoted father, proved to be an absolutely besotted grandfather. He could often be found with Emma in his arms, showing her the horses or the cattle, telling her stories about the ranch. "You're spoiling her," Amelia would say, though her tone was indulgent. "That's what grandparents are for," he'd reply, not even slightly repentant. Robert married in 1899, bringing home a quick-witted lawyer named Margaret whom he'd met in Denver. Sarah, still finishing her medical training, wrote frequently about her studies and her determination to return to Wyoming to practice once she'd completed her degree. As the new century dawned, Vincent and Amelia found themselves looking back on their life together with satisfaction and gratitude. They'd built something lasting, something good. The ranch was prosperous and would be for generations to come. Their children were happy and successful. They had each other, as much in love as ever despite the silver in their hair and the lines on their faces. On a warm June evening in 1900, they sat on their porch together, watching the sun set over land they'd worked together for more than 2 decades. Vincent's arm was around Amelia's shoulders, her head resting comfortably on his chest. "Do you remember," Vincent said suddenly, "that day in my parlor, when you stood there looking so proud and scared, agreeing to marry a stranger?" "How could I forget?" Amelia said. "It was either the worst decision of my life or the best one. I wasn't sure which for quite some time. And now—" She tilted her head to look up at him, seeing the love in his eyes, the contentment in his smile. "The best," she said without hesitation. "Definitely the best, though you made me work for it." "You made me work for it too," he pointed out. "Pushing past all my defenses, refusing to accept my coldness, falling off that damned horse," she laughed. "I didn't do that on purpose. I know, but I'm still grateful for it. That was the night I finally stopped lying to myself about what I felt for you." "Took you long enough," she teased. "It did," he agreed seriously. "I wasted months trying to keep you at arm's length when I should have been pulling you closer. I'll always regret that lost time. We made up for it," she assured him. "We've had 22 years together, Vincent. 22 years of love and partnership and family. That's more than many people ever get. We're lucky." "We are," he agreed. He pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I love you, Amelia Easton, more now than ever." "I love you too," she replied, the words as easy and natural as breathing after all these years. "Always have, always will." They sat in companionable silence as the stars emerged one by one, the sounds of the ranch settling for the night around them. Inside the house, Martha was cleaning up from dinner. In the barn, the horses stirred in their stalls. Across the valley, lights began to appear in neighbors' windows, each one representing another family, another set of lives and loves and dreams. But here, on this porch, Vincent and Amelia had everything they needed. They had each other. They had the life they'd built together from the unpromising beginning of a loveless marriage arrangement. They had the knowledge that they'd created something beautiful and lasting, that their love story, which had started so coldly, had blossomed into something warm and true. "What are you thinking?" Vincent asked, recognizing the contemplative look on her face. That I'd do it all again, she said. Every moment, every struggle, every fear. I'd walk into your parlor and agree to marry you 100 times over if it meant ending up here like this with you. His arms tightened around her. You've made me so happy, he said quietly. Happier than I ever thought possible after losing my family. You gave me a new family, a new purpose. You gave me love when I thought I'd never feel it again. I can never thank you enough for that. You don't need to thank me, she said. Loving you has been the greatest joy of my life. Waking up beside you every morning, working alongside you every day, falling asleep in your arms every night. That's all the thanks I need. They stayed there until full dark had fallen and the chill of evening drove them inside. They climbed the stairs to their room together, moving with the ease of long familiarity. As they prepared for bed, moving around each other in the practiced dance of couples who'd shared a space for decades, Amelia caught sight of their reflection in the dresser mirror. She saw a man and woman in middle age, no longer young but still strong, still vital. She saw the silver in Vincent's dark hair, the laugh lines around his eyes. She saw her own reflection, the way time had softened her features but couldn't dim the happiness that shone from her eyes. They looked like what they were, partners, lovers, best friends, people who'd built a life together and were grateful for every moment of it. Vincent caught her gaze in the mirror and smiled, and her heart still fluttered the way it had on that stormy night so many years ago when he'd first kissed her. Some things, she thought, never changed. The butterflies he gave her, the way his smile could light up her whole world, the sense of rightness she felt whenever he was near. Those were constants, as reliable as the sun rising in the east. They climbed into bed, and Vincent pulled her close, fitting her body against his in the way they'd perfected over 2 decades of sharing this bed. His hand found hers in the darkness, their fingers interlacing automatically. "Good night, my love," he murmured. "Good night," she replied, already drifting toward sleep, safe and content in the arms of the man who'd started as a stranger and become her everything. As she hovered on the edge of dreams, Amelia thought about the girl she'd been, standing terrified in Vincent's parlor, agreeing to a loveless marriage because she had no other choice. If she could go back and tell that girl what was waiting for her, what that cold, distant rancher would become to her, she knew that girl wouldn't believe it. The transformation seemed impossible, the happy ending too good to be true, but it had all been true. Every moment of it. The slow thawing of Vincent's frozen heart, the gradual building of trust and affection, the explosive realization of love that had changed everything. The years of partnership and passion, of children and challenges and triumphs shared. The deep, abiding love that had only grown stronger with time, weathering every storm and emerging more resilient than before. Their story wasn't the traditional romance of love at first sight. It was better than that. It was the story of 2 broken people who'd found each other at their lowest point and built something beautiful together. It was the story of courage and persistence, of walls breaking down and hearts opening up. It was the story of a marriage that had started as a contract and become a love affair for the ages. And it was still being written. They had years ahead of them yet, grandchildren to spoil and children to support, and a ranch to continue running. They had sunsets to watch and conversations to have and nights to spend in each other's arms. They had the rest of their lives to keep loving each other, to keep building on the foundation they'd laid. Amelia smiled in the darkness, feeling Vincent's steady breathing against her hair, and knew that wherever the future led them, they'd face it together. Just as they had from that stormy night when everything had changed. Together, always together. That was the promise they'd made, first reluctantly in a cold church ceremony, and then joyfully with full hearts. And it was a promise they'd keep until their last breath, because the rancher had agreed to a loveless marriage, but her courage had made that impossible to keep. Instead, what they had was love. True, deep, abiding love. The kind of love that poets wrote about and that everyone hoped to find. They were the lucky ones, blessed beyond measure, and they knew it. They'd found their happiness not in spite of their difficult beginning, but perhaps because of it. They'd learned not to take each other for granted, to appreciate every day they had together, to nurture and protect the precious thing they'd built. As sleep finally claimed her, Amelia's last thought was simple and profound. She was home. Not just in this house, not just on this ranch, but here in Vincent's arms. That was where she belonged, where she'd always belong for the rest of her days. And that was the greatest gift of all. In the morning, they'd wake together as they had for thousands of mornings before. They'd greet the new day side by side, partners in every sense of the word. They'd work and laugh and love, building on the life they'd created. And through it all, they'd remember where they'd started and marvel at where they'd ended up. Because sometimes, the most beautiful love stories are the ones that start without love at all. Sometimes, the best marriages are the ones that have to be fought for, earned through courage and persistence and faith. And sometimes, agreeing to a loveless marriage is actually agreeing to the greatest love of your life. You just don't know it yet. Vincent and Amelia knew it now. They'd learned it together, day by day, year by year, building something stronger than either of them could have created alone. And they'd continue learning it, continue living it, for all the years they had left. That was their story. That was their triumph. That was their love, and it was perfect.